A very good afternoon and welcome to the second of today's two Overview and Scrutiny board meetings on Monday, the 21st of September 2020. This is the 6 p.m. meeting. We've had one meeting already today. The second, which is this one, is dealing with the items of cabinet-related scrutiny for the forthcoming cabinet meeting in a week and a half. Welcome to all my board colleagues, to all members of staff and all of those present and joining us for the meeting. As per the virtual meeting regulations, we are still working under the virtual meeting regulations. I will just read out a little bit of housekeeping as to how the meeting will run for all of those that are taking part on the meeting. So if you can just bear with me while I read this out. Please note that this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow the ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by myself as chairman. If you could state your name before you speak, if you are not being introduced by name. Some people may need to dial into the meeting and therefore will not have the benefit of the visual. If you can mute your microphone when you are not talking. If you would like to speak, please use the type RTS request to speak in the instant messaging conversation panel on the left-hand side of your screen and click the arrow button to send. Please note that this panel is visible to all parties. If you are able to, it may be helpful to indicate the particular issue you wish to speak on in order to try and maintain the flow of the meeting. If there are any recommendations moved that require a formal vote, these will be carried out by myself as chairman, asking for a response for, against or abstain from each of the councillors. The regulations governing the virtual meetings require all participants to hear and be heard throughout the meeting. Therefore, when voting, I will be asking participants to do so in acknowledgement that they have heard the debate and have been engaged in the meeting throughout in accordance with the regulations. If you do not feel that this has been the case throughout the meeting, if you could alert me using the chat function and therefore abstain from voting. Should the connection of myself as chairman be lost throughout the meeting, the vice chairman will take over. A short adjournment will be agreed until the connection is resumed. Viewers of the live feed may see a holding risk screen throughout an adjournment. And I'm not jumping ahead, but I do think we have apologies from the vice chairman, so it might just be that we have to go straight to an adjournment screen if that happens. Finally, if we could please ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum as far as possible and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you very much. I have noted already that a number of colleagues, including myself at the beginning, have had some sound issues. I think it is in the process of being resolved, so hopefully that will be fine. But if any colleagues are still having issues with sound, if you log off the meeting and come back in again, it fixed it for me, and I think it's fixed it for a few others as well. So that aside, we will now move into the formal meeting, and I will go to Claire for item 1, apologies. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as you mentioned, we have apologies from the Vice Chair, Councillor Haynes, and we also have apologies from Councillor Miles. Item 2 is substitute members, and I've been notified by the group leader or their nominated representative that Councillor Bobby Dove will be substituting for Councillor Haynes.
Thank you very much, Claire. Moving on to item number 3, which is declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or indeed any local interests of any items on the agenda today? I'm seeing indications from Councillor Iyengar. Councillor Iyengar.
Yes, thank you, Chair. For item 8, environmental related reports, and particularly the item on managing unauthorised encampments, I declare I was a member of the encampments working party from its inception in 2019 until March 2020. So my input to tonight's discussion will be just in that capacity as a working party member. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Iyengar. And Councillor Trent. Councillor Trent.
Sorry, I'm muted instead of unmuted. Yeah, the same as Councillor Iyengar, and in as much as I've been a member of the working party, first day as a sub and then as a permanent member, so I've been a member of that throughout. But also, if road maintenance is discussed, especially things that have already happened, I was one of the streets that was done in the recent couple of weeks or so. So just a very loose interest if that is discussed.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trent, and thank you to Councillor Iyengar. We'll revisit that one, the disclosable interest, sorry, the conflict of interest when we get to the item on the traveller encampments. But yes, we have been advised by the interim monitoring officer that any discussion from yourselves, both of you within that item, will be there as members of the working party rather than any members of the OVU and Scrutiny Board. Colleagues, do we have any further declarations of interest on any other items? I'm not seeing any. In which case we will go to item number 4 on the agenda, which is public issues. Claire?
We have no public statements, questions or petitions for this meeting, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So that takes us to item 5, which is the forward plan. Members of the board will have had a copy of the forward plan to date. Again, we've established a bit of a protocol for working up further items for the next meeting with myself and Chairman in consultation with members of the board via email, rather than trying to do it in the public part of the meeting, not least because they predominantly are related to items of cabinet scrutiny, which aren't published until a little bit later. Any other items that members wish to see on the forward plan that are not currently on the forward plan that we can feed into for further consideration? And again, I'm just looking for any members indicating that's a no, in which case we'll take the forward plan as currently read, but again, as we've established from previous experiences, any items that members of the board do wish to feed into that forward plan, or indeed if there are items that enter onto the cabinet forward plan that we have a real pressing urge to look at, please do let myself or the Vice Chair know so that we can make sure that that is incorporated. Before we jump into the meeting proper, one item to note in terms of the order of items today for colleagues of the board. There will be a slight change in order under item number 8, which is a scrutiny of environment-related cabinet reports. We will be taking the item on the Christchurch Bay and Harbour flood and coastal erosion risk management before the item on the unauthorised encampments. So we will be swapping those two items around. So all of that out of the way, we'll move directly into the main agenda and go to item 4. As mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the aim of this meeting, as it has been for some time in the second of 2 OVU and Scrutiny Board meetings, is to look at selected items which are on the forthcoming cabinet meeting, which we would like to scrutinise. The first will be under the items of scrutiny of transport and infrastructure related cabinet reports, and we have the item on highway maintenance funding 2020-2021 report, and we have Councillor Andy Hadley, who will give us a brief introduction before we open it to the board for questions and comments. Thank you, Councillor Hadley, and we look forward to your introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is obviously the bread and butter of the Highways Department to maintain a good level of quality of the highway. There's a mixture of funding in terms of money that we get as revenue and capital monies, and there's 6 items for Cabinet here. The first of them is about the allocation of the pothole fund, which was money that we were allocated by government to deal with the backlog of potholes. The second is about how we program that, and that's all detailed in Annex A. The third item is the Transport Challenge Fund, which is a bid that we put in for specific, more major roads that in need of maintenance that would otherwise take an awful lot of the budget individually. And so there's a list of those in Annex B. We have a regular routine maintenance programme of reviewing the state of the highways and which ones are priorities for repair. And there's always more repairs to do than money available to do them. So it's very much done by officers according to the major routes are done annually in terms of texture, profile, cracking and skid resistance. The more minor roads are done on a 4-yearly cycle, so 25% of them done each year. And the pavements are done on a manual basis every 4 years. They hope to get to each pavement. In addition to that, there's data from the safety inspections. Obviously, if a pothole gets called in by a member of the public or by a ward councillor, then that's also done. There is a balance of work between what is done in growth and infrastructure and what's done in the environmental team, because they look after the potholes. So there's some funding that we've transferred across to environmental services to be able to do that. There was 200,000 already in the local transport plan, but we've given them 700,000 from the pothole fund pot in order to deliver that programme. And there's in Annex C, it details the work that is done within environmental services. And there's also funding there about the difference between the way in which Christchurch was historically funded. So the amount of money that we have available to do that has been more difficult perhaps in the Christchurch area, but the standard to which we're working is uniform across the three prior authorities. So we're trying to work to the same standard across the piece. Appendix D is a sustainability and climate action report, and that just highlights the areas that potentially we work hard to try and improve, and the area around that is around waste and resource use, and particularly the recycling of materials on site to build the roadbed is something that's been experimented with, and certainly when we did the Wallasdown Road, that used a lot of recycled materials, which cut the carbon footprint by about 25%. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley, for the introduction. Colleagues, we've had the paper and we can see the recommendations in front of us. Can I ask for any colleagues that wish to have any comments or questions? To start with Councillor Mike Green. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got three questions, and I wonder if it's okay to take them individually.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. The first one, I can't really understand paragraph 22, which is talking about the maintenance block as there's been an indication that current amount allocated in future years may increase current allocations by up to 50%. I'm sorry, I just don't understand what that means. Is it saying that more's coming out of the local transport plan, that we're getting more from DFT, or I'm sorry, I just don't understand it.
Councillor Hadley. So, Councillor Hadley, I think you're on mute.
Okay, so we are at the end of a 3-year period in terms of the pothole fund. So we don't yet know what our allocation will be for next year. In terms of the other fund, the challenge fund, we bid into that process. So again, we will have to bid into that process. So there is a lot of uncertainty about the next period. We will find out, we hope, in December what the allocation for next year will be. But effectively, we're at the end of a 3-year programme for both the local transport plan and the pothole fund, and anything like challenge fund or the pinch point fund that we've been looking to bid for, we have to obviously bid into. So there is significant uncertainty in terms of the future capital funds that are available to us, because it's dependent on government announcements that are not yet made. So,
Chairman, I'm sorry. Before I go on to the next one, I'm not sure, Andy, that quite addressed what I was asking. So I don't understand what it means by saying that we've got an indication that the maintenance block, which is obviously part of the standard LTP funding, may increase by up to 50%. So I don't think it's to do with the pothole or challenge fund or the pinch point fund, but I can't understand the way that paragraph's been written.
Yes, it's the local transport fund. So effectively, that has also reached the end of a 3-year period. So we haven't yet found out what our allocation under the LTP is for next year either.
Okay. Right. Thank you. The second question is in, I think it's Appendix B actually, and you mentioned it, Councillor Hadley, about the equalisation of funding into Christchurch. Can I just check, is that done on, when you're talking about equality, because I know that there was a significant underfunding of Christchurch roads compared with Bourne and Poole within the Dorset authority, and that was then disaggregated over to us in the same way. But are we looking at it from a pure mile by mile comparison, or are we looking at it as car miles travelled? Because obviously if you've got roads which carry far less traffic, then you would expect it to have a lower amount of money spent on it in the long run?
Yes. So and under the bottom of Appendix C, I think it is the highway delivery revenue funding, and that shows that the Christchurch has about a quarter of the funding per kilometre that came across from Dorset Council. That's potentially because they capitalised their maintenance programme, so the revenue wasn't there to be passed. In terms of the I don't have the figure for the kilometres per classification, but effectively, as I said, the inspection regime is more frequent for the more major roads, and those would suffer more wear and tear, and therefore probably need full repair more frequently. And there's more of those in the urban area, particularly bus routes are the ones that need the most maintenance. And there's less of those in Christchurch. So yes, it will be a mix of number of kilometres and also the usage.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, can I just on page 50, there's the element of, there's the bit about the outstanding defect there at the moment. It said over 1,000 and 750 are past their fixed by dates effectively. Because obviously, I know you have various ones which are meant to be fixed in 7 days, and various ones that are meant to be fixed within 28 days and such like. And I presume that that's what that's talking about. Are you able just to give us a little bit more detail about why it is that we've fallen so far behind on these at the moment?
I think an officer may be able to help me out, but I think the reason for that, it's obviously in the environmental services team, was around COVID. So there's a significant backlog because there were the gangs couldn't work during the COVID period, not least because we couldn't get hold of the tarmac. So there's an issue about supply chain, but also some of the staff were off shielding. So I think it's partly just catching up on that, but it's also in giving them 700,000 out of the pothole fund. There's a balance to be had between what you spend on individual little potholes or what you spend on strategically clearing a whole road, sorting a whole road out, and that money is to try and assist with getting rid of that backlog.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green, for your questions. Councillor Millie Earl. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking through this paper and saw that one of my worst roads for cycling is on the list, which is brilliant for pothole filling. It's a nightmare to cycle along, mainly because you're at risk of falling off. But what I wanted to ask is tied in with this funding. Obviously, it's the pothole fund. It's not to do with the active travel fund. But I wanted to ask: will there be any opportunity to look at the way our roads operate and whether there is an opportunity for more cycle infrastructure or even changing the road layout just to make it better? Because some of those roads, they're pretty important roads, Castle Lane West, Ashley Road, both here and in Bournemouth. Is there going to be a mechanism that ward councillors and even the community can get more involved in improving our roads altogether? Thank you.
So it is a challenge, and my experience in Poole has been actually the team have been pretty good at looking at the opportunities to improve as they go. So rather than just to repair and put back exactly as it was, to ask the question: is that line in the right place, or is there a better way in which we can deal with stuff? But the funding is limited, so we can't do major change under the maintenance fund. Having said that, one of the items within the resurfacing programme, the Wimborne Road Phase 3 in Oakdale, has been deferred, and that's been deferred because it sort of ties into the Transforming Cities Fund work. So we could resurface it now; it's overdue for resurfacing, but actually it's better to wait and do it strategically as part of the Transforming Cities Fund when things like cycle routes and bus stops and other things can be improved as part of that programme. So I think they try and do their best to manage the two together, sort of the new and the existing.
Thank you very much, Councillor Earl. Councillor Tony Trent. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, given that quite a few of the local roads were resurfaced from the pothole fund rather than patch up the potholes, an area of resurfacing was put. And the road that I live in and a number of nearby roads in the wards were given a treatment about 3 years ago And that turned out to be a disaster and caused all sorts of problems. And some of these roads have been redone recently, and the surface seems better, but only time will tell. I'm actually wondering whether there's been any work done, or perhaps there's something that we could do as a scrutiny committee on the different methods that have been used to treat roads and treat potholes and things like that, because some ideas obviously work better than others, and I think it would be really useful for us to actually have some information on that and find out why, for example, the work that was done in my road and one or two other roads in the Alderney and Bourne Valley area 3 years ago had to be redone or partially redone this year. And I think that we ought to get in amongst some of the detail on this and sort of understand the different methods that are being used. The method that was being used in Wallasdown Road, I know that's a different method, a busier road, but there was talk about that being used in one or two of the busier side roads. And it would be nice to know how that stacks up against other methods of surfacing roads and so on. And in some cases, the only way you can deal with a badly potholed area is to actually resurface it. But I do think that we need to get in amongst it and look at the various methods employed and maybe standing as to what works and what doesn't work, because it seems a shame to do major works and then have to redo them 3 years later because the quality was so poor. That's just really a question and a request that we look at it at some point.
Could I suggest, I mean, in response, it might be a more useful to have an all members seminar. I actually found it really useful. I was getting concerned about why potholes were falling apart very quickly, and I went out with the crews to understand how they filled potholes. And part of that is that when the inspector goes around, if he observes a significant hole, he fills it in just with whatever he's got in order to make it safe in the very short term. But I think the teams are experimenting all the time. They're obviously, as I said, they're trying to recycle more. I think the Branksome Wood Road and the roads that you were suggesting, there was a problem with that contractor because I complained about it when I had gone along there and saw how the surface had broken up very quickly. So I think that was an issue then. And again, we got into bad weather and they could only do some of the work in good weather. So it may be more of a member seminar if that would be useful, perhaps rather than a scrutiny item, if that suits you.
Well, I just think that we need to look at it in a little bit more detail and find out what works and what doesn't work, and maybe move forward better, because there must have been some money wasted 3 years ago. If roads were redone, and so I'm concerned about that, because I'm sort of concerned that we get good value for money and we get the best possible result. And I think all of these things need to be looked at. Whether it's a seminar or whether it's a scrutiny is obviously up to members.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Trent, and thank you for the suggestion, Councillor Hadley. I think we have one final member wishing to speak, which is Councillor Mike Brooke. Councillor Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Just to check, can you hear me?
Can indeed.
Fine, thank you. Well, I hope this is a quick one. Listening to the conversations, the emphasis has been on roads, potholes and roads. My understanding of highways is that it is not just roads, but it also includes pavements. And what I can't see in this document at all is any proposal or idea about the way in which our pavements are going to be improved, because they seem to be the last thing that is considered when resurfacing takes place. We've had quite a number of roads in Broadstone either tarred or resurfaced, and York Road recently very, very successful. But the pavements are ignored, and with growing proportions of elderly people and the emphasis supposed to be on pedestrians as well as cyclists and cars, it does seem to me a shame that we're not actually developing some sort of policy that would enable footpaths to be improved at the same time as a road is being resurfaced or potholes filled in. If Councillor Hadley could give a response to that, I'd be very, very pleased.
Thank you. Yes, I did mention it in my summary, but actually paragraph 14 talks about the pavement management system and looking specifically at pavements, and so they are reviewed physically because they don't have machinery to be able to do it. Obviously, with all the street furniture that's on them, but they are inspected, and there is a sum of money within the LTP programme specifically looking at pavements, which may need to be done at a different time than resurfacing. But when a major resurfacing project on a road goes, generally the pavement is done at the same time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Colleagues, I've got no more members wishing to speak, so unless there are any recommendations which I'm not seeing for this item, I'd like to thank Councillor Hadley for your time and for introducing the item and answering the questions, and we'll move on. Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. That takes us on, colleagues, to item 7 of the agenda, which is the scrutiny of regeneration-related Cabinet reports. We have one to consider, which is the item on the forthcoming Cabinet around flood defences, in particular the Pool Bridge to Hunger Hill. I believe we have 2 Cabinet members with us today, Councillor Mark Howell and Councillor Felicity Rice. I think it may well be Councillor Howell that's going first. So unless I hear otherwise, I will pass to Councillor Howell for an introduction to the paper. Thank you, Councillor Howell.
Oops. Sorry, Councillor Broadhead. I'm actually going to be presenting this paper. One second, I'm just going to put my headphones on.
No problem. We'll just bear with Councillor Rice for a moment, in which case we won't be hearing from Councillor Howell first. We'll hear from Councillor Felicity Rice on this item. Thanks for joining us, Councillor Rice. Over to you.
Hello. Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Yes, this is mostly a paper related to the seafront management team, which is why I'm presenting this. We have Officer Matt Hosey with us, who is able to answer any detailed questions. So anything about the regeneration, I'm sure he will be more than happy to answer as well. So the Pool Bridge to Hunger Hill paper, essentially this is about looking for permission from Cabinet to go ahead and place an outline business case to the Environment Agency regarding a £12 million scheme to sort out the flood defences in the last remaining section that needs to be done to protect Old Town Pool and all the residents' homes and livelihoods that depend on that area. Recent changes to Environment Agency rules and assessments has actually meant that the mental health impacts that results from a home being flooded, which is obviously sort of incredibly severe and long-lasting for anybody that's experienced that, it is now valued economically at a much greater emphasis, and hence, therefore, in this dense urban area of Old Town Pool, this has helped the business case significantly, and we are now able to apply for the full £12 million that it will cost to build the sea defences here. Apart from protecting all of those homes and families, it will also help to boost the regeneration of the area from the bridge to Hunger Hill area, because it provides that stability and cohesion for all of those developments that need to be along that area. The business case is called an adaptive approach, meaning that the most important and urgent work will be done in the next year or two, but some of the other work can be done at a more appropriate time, such as in 2075 or later. So these projects are really long-lasting and predicting 100 years into the future. So, for example, some of the walls can be built to a certain height now, but built in such a way that they allow for a height extension maybe 50 years later when sea levels have risen, or we know more accurately by how much they are going to rise or have risen at that point. For the business case, we have to clarify that there will be no ongoing costs to the Environment Agency. That's part of their rules. So the maintenance of the scheme, which is roughly £330,000, and also the extensions that are done later down the line, such as in 2075, will also be covered by the council. So this is equivalent to about £1.1 million over the life of the scheme. These costs will be funded through the BCP revenue maintenance budget, SIL budgets, and also there's some areas around the RNLI that would be predicted to be funded by them. As part of the work, it will create a prom around the waterfront in that area, which is in keeping with the previous pool local plan. And that is the summary of the scheme. So really, it's quite a good news story, making progress on protecting that area. So I'm looking forward to taking this to Cabinet.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rice. I'll move to colleagues for questions or comments. On a personal note, it's always nice to see Cabinet papers referencing what we're going to be doing in 2071 and 2105. Only in local government can we do that kind of far-reaching thing. Actually, only in flood defences and coastal erosion normally. Councillor Mark Anderson. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I like you all, the welcome scheme. I was rather intrigued that we're having to do it in so many different phases, and I assume that is because the area that we're talking about has some underlying flood defence that we might be able to get be used to build on. But the one question I did have, it was to do with paragraph 11 on page 61, which talks about just as current policy of flood defence delivery wholly through regeneration and private development is not providing the required level of investment, and it goes on. And I'm just wondering if that's something that has come out as a result of the current standings and the fact that we have to do higher walls, etc., or whether there is a shortfall in the original level of financing in this.
Councillor Rice?
Yeah, sorry. Would you just be able to repeat where you're referring to?
It's page 61 on my copy, which is the agenda for today's meeting. But it's paragraph 11 in the which is the last one, which starts continue to rely on developers to provide flood defences.
Okay, great. Can you just repeat your question now that I've found the paragraph? Sorry.
Okay, what it was is it basically it talks about the regeneration and private developers are not going to provide enough funding, and I'm just wondering whether this is something that's occurred as a result of having to improve the level of flood defences, or whether this is just because of something the regeneration plan and the developers have not come up with, and if it's because of the regeneration developers, do we have any options on that?
Well, I don't know whether I'm going to fully answer your question, but I do know that in the past they have tried various different ways of getting this to happen through regeneration and through development schemes and funding that way. So I know there was a change so that there was zero SIL funding at one point to try and encourage this to be developed. But there was just the issue of a variety of landowners, and if one of them does it, and the others don't, and there was no point in them making that investment. So it was just that difficulty of getting a combined approach. But I also know that the change, it was a relatively recent change in the government agencies' classification of how much funding would be given for the mental health aspect that I mentioned. So I know that the team went to the landowners a year ago and said, right, we've got a plan to sort this out, but it will cost you £5 million that you'll have to invest into it. And they were willing to contribute at that point because they could see that they hadn't managed before, and that this was actually going to really help the regeneration of the area. And then just in June this year, the policy changed, and that's meant that we didn't need to get their contributions, and we can get it fully from the flood defence aid money.
Chairman, if I could come back, surely if they've agreed to provide funding, surely we should be chasing the funding anyway. The fact that we don't need to get it is rather here or there. It's if someone has made an offer of funding to help local government and we're always short of funds, surely we should be taking them up on that offer.
Well, I can let Matt Hosey discuss the details of that, but I suppose it would be difficult to go back to central government and say, no, we don't want all your money because we want the developers to pay for it. However, there is acknowledgement that obviously this is really good for the area and potentially good for us. And so there are changes to the SIL and also contributions that can be made because now they don't need to contribute this way. It can then go back into the council's pot for doing flood defences in the future. But Matt Hosey, would you like to come in and just explain that?
Yeah. Okay. So initially, when we looked at the business case, the partnership funding calculator, which is how flood defence grant and aid is calculated, did indicate that we would need significant contributions. And at the time, we had reduced SIL to 0%. So I think for the last few years, SIL has been at 0% to try and encourage the developers to put their developments into action and deliver the flood defences along with that. But it didn't happen because of the reasons that Councillor Rice just mentioned. The difficulty with getting everybody to do it at the same time was just too much. So our initial talks with the developers, like I say, a year ago, did indicate that they would be happy to contribute. But on our journey with the business case, the sort of stance we took really was that actually, if we reintroduce SIL to the frontages and offered up the contribution from the council instead, then we could get the equivalent amount of money or more through the normal rate for SIL. So we were going to take that route to make the gaining of the additional funds required more simple, because trying to get the legal agreements in place with a number of developers in line with trying to deliver the flood defences would be very difficult. However, in June, the rules changed on flood defence grant and aid funding, and because of the additional people benefits, as they call it, it's now fully fundable. But what we will do is reintroduce SIL to the area, which will get us more funds into the council, as it were, in place of those contributions. So in reality, we will still be getting the money out of the developers.
Thank you very much. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have one further question on this item, which is from Councillor Drew Mellor. Councillor Mellor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and really glad to see that it's coming forward. The question I had was around, and I may have misunderstood this, but the way the report's written is about an outline business case, but actually committing to funding. And the portfolio head has said, I believe, we can get it fully from the EA. So I was just wondering if we could have a brief bit of help in terms of the process. Have we got it from the EA, or is it an outline business case? And if we haven't got it, what's the sort of the process around us committing money before the substantive piece of work, the substantive 12 million quid is there? Thank you.
Councillor Rice.
So we won't be needing to pay any money for the scheme. It's funded by the Environment Agency. The aspect that we will be needing to pay is further down the line. So we do need to pay for the maintenance of the scheme once it's in place, and also for the changes that will happen sort of in about the year 2075. So hopefully that's. I don't know whether Matt, have you got anything else to add on to that?
Yeah, sure. So the process for flood defence grant and aid means that we will get full funding once the outline business case has been approved by the Environment Agency. So we've held off on submitting it. That's what the Cabinet paper is about, to get permission to submit. However, we've got the Environment Agency on our steering group for the project, so they're fully aware of what we're bidding for or likely to bid for. We've got what they call the Large Projects Review Group from the Environment Agency booked in for October on a provisional booking. So should it get through Cabinet, it will go straight to LPRG. And once we get funding approved, then we can move on with detailed design and then construction. So the way we're treated as local authorities is once we get approvals for an OBC, that's it really. That's our funding all the way through to construction. And as Councillor Rice mentioned there, it's just about giving certainty to LPRG, the Large Projects Review Group, on all of the funding. So we're underwriting the cost really of those future adaptations. And the reasons for those, I think someone asked this earlier. One is because the assets in one area are in very good condition and won't need replacing until 2071. And in the other area, which is in front of the Aqua Flats and round by Asda, the impact of putting the flood defences into the full height in that area would be quite harsh at the moment. And also it would mean, because they taper out onto the A350, would be a much longer defence. So that would need adaptation, but not until 2105. So yes, we're underwriting the cost of those future phases in 2071 and 2105, but it's for £836,000, and who knows what's going to be around at that point in time.
Okay. Yeah, Matt, thank you ever so much for the answer, really detailed. But so the crux is you're highly confident that we're going to get this money, but the fact is, we haven't got it yet. So it is dependent on a future process with the Environment Agency. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Mellor. Colleagues, I'm seeing no more requests to speak, in which case we'll draw this item to a close. Thank you very much to Matt and also to Councillor Felicity Rice for presenting that item. So, colleagues, that takes us on to item 7 of the Cabinet agenda, and apologies, it will take us on to item 8 of the Cabinet agenda, which is the scrutiny of environment-related Cabinet reports. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be swapping around those two items. So the first one we'll deal with is another a flood issue, which is the Cabinet paper for the forthcoming Cabinet meeting on the Christchurch Bay and Harbour FCERM, which is a flood and coastal erosion risk management strategy. And I think, again, we have Councillor Rice to introduce this item. Thank you, Councillor Rice.
Yes, thank you very much. So this paper is about getting the right strategies in place, basically, to be able to apply for central government funding to manage this section of shoreline. So in general, there are 3 levels of documents to shoreline management. The top one is the Shoreline Management Plan, which describes top level how to manage the shoreline, such as something called hold the line or allow erosion, which is called no active intervention. This has already been in place for this area. So we have the Shoreline Management Plan. The next level down is then creating an FCERM strategy. That explains the techniques used to manage the shoreline. So most of our area in BCP has one of these, apart from this remaining section in Hengistbury Head, east of Hengistbury Head to Hurst Spit. Because of the natural geography of the area, the movement of sediment around this bay needs to be thought of as one piece of the jigsaw. And so that is why the new Forest District Council are also part of the team that would be involved in developing this strategy document. So that's the second level. And then the third level is the outlined business cases that could be put through to the Environment Agency to get funding to progress projects such as the one that we've just spoken about before. So there was some previous documents for the Christchurch area. However, they were not a FCERM strategy and did not have the approval from the Environment Agency. So this is why this piece of work was highlighted and prioritised as needing to be done for this area, because this will enable future applications for central government funding. The strategy will take about 2.5 years to complete, and there are at least 6 different consultation points where councillors and residents will be able to input into it. The timing is good because it complements the Lower Avon strategy, also being developed by the Environment Agency, which looks at the fluvial changes in the harbour coming down the river and goes hand in hand with looking at tidal locking and flooding. We've actually had the £450,000 funding confirmed for this project. So if Cabinet agreed to go ahead with this piece of work, then it is already fully funded. So again, a great piece of work by the council officers, and many thanks to them.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Right, I'll move to colleagues. I'm not seeing a tsunami wave of, as a flood joke, I shouldn't go there, should I? I have 2 now. Councillor Anderson first. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank officers, and I welcome support. I'll be looking forward to reading it. I won't go into some of the details that I found fascinating about it, because I don't want to bore the rest of you, but I do have one question which relates to the long groin at Hengistbury Head. Now, depending on who you talk to, there's talk about the long groin, while protecting the beaches of Bournemouth and Poole, has a detrimental effect on the erosion in the Christchurch Bay. And I'm just wondering whether there will be any modelling of what the various stages of deposition or erosion would occur depending on the size of the long groin. So there was talk at one stage of extending it out.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Matt. I was just going to say that I agree with Councillor Anderson that it is absolutely fascinating. I love all of this geography stuff that's here, but I am in no way qualified to answer that technical question. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I should have introduced myself the last time actually. So it's Matt Hosey. I'm head of flood and coastal erosion risk management. Yeah, there's a join up here actually, Councillor Anderson. So the Hengistbury Head long groin is covered under the existing Poole Bay Beach Management Scheme, and we've got funding for that at the moment to make those adjustments or redesign of the groin. So that we're going to make a proper start on that really next calendar year, as it were. But we're just preparing for that stage as we go. What I would say actually is we've got a fantastic model just put in place for the whole of the two bays area. So the Poole Bay and Christchurch Bay. We've just had a model completed by Hydraulics Research, Wallingford, which we're actually running in-house. So we've got a coastal scientist in-house who runs that model, and we can look at how the sediment movements around the whole of those two bays are affected by any structures that we put in. I don't think we're looking at changing the shape or size of the groin too much. I know that our talks with Environment Agency modellers around the unpredictability of doing so would have concerns for the Environment Agency with Water Framework Directive. So I think we're looking at as like for like as possible, but increasing the height to deal with sea level rise. But the model that we've got would give us the confidence that it won't affect the movement of sediment in the sense of being detrimental to Christchurch Bay. I would say the Christchurch harbour frontage is a mixed bag really, because there is a concern that if you build a bigger groin, then you starve the feed of sediment, and that could have an effect. But there's also worries about too much sediment as well, because that has effects of blocking up the harbour. So I think we are in a position where we've got a very happy equilibrium at the moment, and would seek to not disturb that too much.
Thank you very much for that, Matt. Councillor Anderson?
I just say thank you, Matt, for that. I would love to have a look at your model when we are back in the stage that you can show it to me. So thank you for that, and I very much appreciate the answer.
Absolutely. I'll just say on that, we do run some FSERM panel meetings, which any councillors are free to come and see what we do. So yeah, you're welcome to join in with those.
Thank you very much. Add me to that list as well of modelling geeks, but that kind of stuff is ever so interesting for those of us that find it interesting anyway. But it's a bit worrying that a number of us are very, very excited about a computer modelling of sand moving around, but it's very important. So thank you for that. Councillor Bartlett.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've heard a bit about flood defences for Poole. We've heard a bit more about Christchurch. I've just heard Poole Bay Management Plan or Scheme brought into the equation here. So my question is, where does this all come together for the BCP coastal line in total? Is it covered under the shoreline management plan? And is that a BCP plan, or is it an environmental agency plan? Basically, is there a document you can go out and see what our plans are for all the coasts that we're responsible for? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll take that one again. There's three tiers really of delivery, as Councillor Rice said. So the shoreline management plan sets the policies for the whole of our coastline. We are covered in totality for BCP by the Hurst Spit to Dalston shoreline management plan that was approved in 2011. So if you go to our website, poolebay.net, you'll find access to any of our strategic documents on there, and the shoreline management plan is included. So that sets the policies. Then we have a strategy in place for the Poole Bay, Poole Harbour to Wareham strategy. So that covers us from Hengistbury Head all the way round through Poole Harbour. So that our frontage from Hengistbury Head westwards is covered by that strategy. Then the bit that's missing is the strategy for the east of Hengistbury Head. So that's the proposal we've got at the moment for the Christchurch Bay and Harbour strategy. It obviously extends beyond our boundary at Chewton Bunny because it goes round to Hurst Spit. But we're leading on the project, but have encouraged New Forest to join in with us because I guess coastal processes don't really respect authority boundaries, and Christchurch Bay is a natural coastal cell. So that strategy, if we get approvals for that, that will cover us from a strategic position. Then we look at projects in sub-cells of a strategy, really. So the Poole Bay Beach Management, for example, that is the beach front from Hengistbury Head all the way around to Sandbanks. But the business case for that was basically hinged on the strategy that I just mentioned. The Poole Bridge to Hunger Hill outline business case that we've just mentioned, that's also hinged on the same strategy. So as you'll see, there's various business cases which are being hinged on the approved strategy, and the fact it's approved by the Environment Agency as well as the Council means that we're all aligned with what we want for the frontages.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bartlett.
So does the shoreline management plan, is that an environmental agency document, or is it BCP's?
It's a joint document with authorities that are between Hurstspit and Durlston. So at the time it was for New Forest, Christchurch, Bournemouth, Poole, Purbeck. So all of the authorities and the Environment Agency were also part of that as well. But it was on behalf of all of those 5 authorities. So it's something that everyone's approved. It's a standard document that's approved by all authorities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartlett. Colleagues, I don't see any further requests to speak, so I'll draw this item to a close. Thank you very much to Matt Hosey and Councillor Felicity Rice for that.
Thank you.
I haven't seen any formal recommendations, so we've explored that one, I think, in good detail. Colleagues, we're moving on to the second part of item 8, the scrutiny of environment-related cabinet reports, which is the paper on managing unauthorised encampment policies and procedures. So again, I'll come to Councillor Rice in a moment to introduce the item. As per the declarations at the beginning, I think we've got 2 members, Councillor Mohan Iyengar and Councillor Tony Trent, who, if they do speak on this item, will be speaking as members of the working party rather than the board, and therefore, if there are any recommendations, can't take part as a board member. But I will pass to Councillor Rice again for the introduction. Thank you, Councillor Rice.
Thank you. So, as you explained, I'm presenting this as the chair of the cross-party member working group. As part of the harmonisation of the 3 councils, a cross-party member group was set up in October 2019 to clarify the policies across the 3 towns for immediate management of unauthorised encampments. So this covered items such as toilets, security and skip provision, which were all previously different in the various different areas. Discussions then proceeded within the member working group to whether there was any other longer term management that the working party would like to look at for BCP Council, and that led to the additional recommendations in this paper to be able to progress with longer term management. I would really like to thank the input of all councillors to this that were part of the member working group. So this included Councillor Jane Kelly as Vice Chair, along with Councillor Mohan Iyengar, Councillor Dwayne Farr, Councillor Diana Butler, Councillor Tony Trent, and a special mention to the late Councillor Bungie for his contribution. The group met 4 times monthly between November and March 2019 for about 1.5 hours to 2 hours per meeting with additional reading material. So the amount of time and dedication to this piece of work has been really appreciated, and I personally found it a really enjoyable and interesting group to chair. We agreed in February-March time for this paper to be presented to Cabinet. However, this was just when COVID-19 hit. There was then a 4-month delay, so when we were able to pick up this work again, we then had a further meeting in July 2020 to clarify that members were still happy to proceed with this paper to Cabinet. At this point, there was a formal switch in membership, so additional thanks goes to Councillor Simon McCormack and Councillor May Haynes, although Councillor May Haynes had also been to some of the earlier meetings. This report establishes a harmonised policy across BCP in the management of unauthorised encampments, proposes a balanced approach to target hardening as local circumstance dictates, and asks for permission for the cross-party working group to look at the necessary governance, resources and consultation to explore the feasibility of providing temporary stopping places and preemptive injunctions going forwards. I look forward to Cabinet supporting this sort of good piece of work from the cross-party working group and also the continued cross-party work on this difficult and detailed piece of work in the future.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rice. So, colleagues, we've got Oh, apologies.
Sorry to interrupt. It was just that I did have a message from Councillor May Haynes that she wanted to speak on behalf of the group. I'm not sure if she's available at the moment and whether she wants to say something now or...
Part of the item. So, Councillor Haynes, if you are there, quite happy to bring you in now.
I am, Chair. Thank you. Before the board members actually go into discuss this item, I had covered for one meeting on behalf of Councillor Iyengar, and then I attended the very last meeting, so I kind of missed out on all the other discussions in between. But having said that, I've been a councillor for quite a number of years, and so therefore have a lot of experience in issues relating to gypsy travellers. And I think that the one particular recommendation that I am rather cautious about is the one to explore the potential for a stopping place. And certainly I can speak on behalf of the experience from when I was in the Borough Pool. We had actually been through this exercise at least twice, causing a lot of angst and distress to communities where sites were potentially could actually be in those areas. But at the end of it, a site wasn't identified. So I just wanted to put that point across to the board members that on paper, it looks like a sensible option, but I think the reality is a lot different to actually be able to carry out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Haynes, for your input there on behalf of the working group. I know we have a few other members of the working group on the in the meeting as well. Do any of the members of the meeting group, before we open it up to other board members, wish to add any additional information to what we've had from Councillors Rice and Councillor Haynes? Councillor Councillor Trent.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I had the additional privilege of having been involved in the scrutiny and the build-up to the seeking for sites back in Poole back in 2011 or thereabouts, and it was quite a difficult process. But I think what I would say, and it's slightly at odds with what Councillor Haynes is saying, is that all of the useful solutions seem to depend on us actually making some progress in actively looking for what I believe should be alternative stopping places. I don't think we should be looking for one site. I think we should be looking for 2 or 3 smaller sites. And one of the things that was of great interest, particularly earlier on in the process, was the ability to take out preemptive injunctions. Now, at the time, this was going through the High Court and various other places where some London boroughs had taken blanket injunctions. And there was an emerging bit of advice that you would actually be looking at taking out preemptive injunctions on certain sites. Now, the thing with that is that that in itself is still very much dependent on us looking for alternative stopping places. So these two things, I think, are a very important part of the process, but they can't be separated. And I do think that we actually need to look at the recommendations, and they are a fairly balanced set of recommendations. I would have liked to have been a lot more adventurous in the preemptive injunctions, but there were issues with them. So I think what you've got in the way of recommendations is a very balanced set of recommendations based on a lot of discussion and a lot of detail.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you, Chair. Very much obliged. Yes, no, I find it strange that Councillor Haynes would bring this to the table about the concern for pool residents when historically it's been done, because this working group is for temporary stopping places and the other solutions for unauthorised encampments across the whole of the BCP conurbation. So I don't think it's of a great deal of value to actually say, well, this is what happened in Poole X amount of years, which is now no longer an authority and is now BCP. I wasn't a member of the working group, but from the study which I did, and also with the party which I am with, is that it seems that a lot of local authorities actually benefit from alternative stopping places in dealing with unauthorised encampments. But I'm sure that within the paper, I'm sure that Councillor Haynes should be reassured that this has been taken into account and that the benefits of actually looking at alternative stopping places somewhere, maybe multiple, as Councillor Trent says, across the whole conurbation rather than just Poole, will actually be what is actually considered in the future, should it be passed by Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. Councillor Iyengar. Councillor Iyengar.
Sorry, you think I know this by now, wouldn't you? Unmuted. Thank you, Chair. I'll confine myself to just 2 points, and again, speaking as a member of the working party, or former member, on the preemptive injunctions and on the temporary stopping places. On the first one, I think in agreement with Councillor Trent, there was considerable discussion on this. I remember a very good debate on this, and with input from officers and from legal. And literally, we were having the discussions within a dynamic situation in regard to what was happening in London with the London councils, and some of them who had secured these preemptive injunctions. Actually, they were actually seeing it happen where they were actually being challenged. And I think I can, hopefully without sort of arousing debate, report reliably that the cost benefits seem to be moving away from preemptive injunctions, and there was some caution in the room about whether now it was worth embarking on it. So hence I think that's captured into the wording of one of the recommendations. But on the point about alternative stopping places, I think also I'm open to challenge as to whether my recollection is correct, but from some voices in the group saying, okay, ought to be looked at, I think then particularly some of the more experienced members who've had experience, particularly of the last debate, and a lot more experience than I've had, for instance, saying, goodness me, this needs one hell of a lot of discussion and collaboration, not just between councillors, but between all affected parties, not least, of course, the groups themselves who form the encampments. So hence the reason I think that the wording is as it is in the cabinet related document. That's, I think, embodies the sort of the concern, could I even say the nervousness around all of this, to that actually we ought to just collaborate widely and proceed cautiously with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Iyengar. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As a councillor who has actually experienced an incursion into the ward, and having seen the disruption that it caused for our residents, I'm personally in favour of the working group looking at anything, any idea that might actually improve on that or remove the likelihood of that happening again. Now, at the end of the day, I think this recommendation is only that the working group are authorised to look into this particular option, and it may well be that when they've looked at it a little further, they may decide that it's not a suitable thing. The difficulty with the recommendation as it's worded is, of course, it wraps up a lot of different issues into one recommendation. We've already heard that there's some nervousness about the injunction, etc., etc., but that, of course, is different from actually having temporary stopping places. So, if we alter the recommendation, it may be that one part of it is okay and another bit of it isn't. But from my perspective, I do feel that we'll explore any avenue. And if Councillor Haynes has got experience from before, then I'm sure she'll be able to put that into the debate to make sure that all the issues are fully considered. I've got mixed views on it, and I think the working group should look at all of these things. Yeah, I think that's all I really need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Bobby Dove. Councillor Dove.
Yes, thank you. I think I just wanted to start off saying how disappointed I was with Councillor Farquhar's comments. There are many councillors who have a great deal of experience, and certainly more than I do. And the benefit that Councillor Hayne brings to us is, of course, and Councillor Farquhar even wouldn't be aware of, perhaps, is that there's been so many pieces of work that have been taken in this area before. So 2011, 2013, 2015, culminating in an overarching report for 2017. And it was a cross-county, all authorities across Dorset, which included Poole, Bournemouth and Dorset. So I don't think we can devalue anyone's experiences within this realm. I do, however, echo a number of thoughts, as mentioned by Councillor Bartlett, in particular, the fact that there's this one recommendation which appears to wrap up so many possibilities and issues within it. If you just bear with me, I've just made some notes here. So if we are looking at a site, which I think could be one of the possibilities, what we need to be looking at, and this was mentioned obviously in the group on Thursday, the briefing that we had, was we need to understand how these sites work and how they impact everyone around it, the pros and the cons, so to speak. So the cost of the site against the upkeep of costs of current policy, circa 100k at the moment. The decrease and increase of unauthorised encampments elsewhere where temporary sites have been introduced. The size of the camps that we, stopping places that we may want to be looking at, and has that impacted on the success? Other preventative measures that councils have to employ, even though they have stopping sites within their local authorities, and cost of those preventative measures. The impact of the stopping site upon the settled community, and could it even be considered that we also only have a temporary stopping site in the approach to the Dorset Steam Fair, for example? And how would this current 100k that we're spending with our current policy reduce our current yearly outlet? So therefore, it's a bit chicken and egg, and I'm just wondering whether or not we need some more work that needs to be done on this paper before we can make a decision. It feels somewhat, with all these questions unanswered, that actually it's a little bit premature. We need to explore all the options before it then goes to Cabinet, before any recommendations are made. And I think just a real thorough examination and sort of, almost in-depth examination post-mortem of how other authorities have been finding this would be really helpful before we then start making decisions as to how else to proceed. I think also we cannot forget that if we haven't consulted at this stage with people, how can we therefore decide whether or not a site or a number of sites is what is required, and how can we even decide where it will go? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dove. Councillor Mellor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and a big thanks to Councillor Dove before that, because that really well said. Look, this is we all know this is a hugely complex issue. It has to be measured, thought through, and before we start narrowing down the options, which we've done in this paper, and I think and Councillor Bartlett's just put in the messaging bar, were has the travelling community been consulted? And I know for a fact that the chair of Cushley Bock hasn't been consulted, and a lot of these people, but a lot of them are in Poole, so who have significant experience of this, and know the people that we should be speaking to. What did we hear from Councillor Trent? I believe a lot of discussion and detail has been done. I'm actually a bit more frustrated about this than I thought I'd be, because I just think it sums up a lot. Stop trying to do things to people without asking them first. We're going down a narrow list of options when you haven't asked the community to do this. There's no material evidence that measures the answer. So I completely agree with Councillor Dove, and I believe My understanding, I think this is too far forward for now, and I'd actually be quite keen to remove the second point. So I'm happy to propose that if anybody else. This is too early. We need to do more work on it. You actually need to listen to people before you bring things forward. So I propose that we actually move the second recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Mellor. Is there anybody that on that point, anybody that will look to second that that proposal? So to be clear, we're talking about recommendation B, which talks about the next steps. It's whether to just remove that from the recommendations that are presented to Cabinet. I must admit, while I'm waiting to see if anybody else would like to formally second that, I don't normally get too much involved from the chair, but obviously this is an issue that many of us have been around for many years. And so I've just noticed that Councillor Anderson is wishing to second that. And in a similar way to Councillor Dove, my thoughts on this is that I'm very inclined to agree with Councillor Bartlett in that we need resolutions to this. We need to explore everything that is going to resolve the issue. And of course, one of the things that we do have to consider as well, which we haven't really talked about, is a lot of the mood music that is coming out of government on this. And they've committed to be doing some more work on this. And I even believe that we're getting some clarity and maybe some new powers by the end of the year. So it might well be that the events overtake us anyway. But my slight issue is the fact that there's in my view, the recommendations fall into two camps: the now and the next. So what are we doing now about target hardening and management of unauthorised encampments, which I think broadly speaking is really good work. And I personally really like a lot of the recommendations to harmonise how we currently deal with it at the moment. The next one is about the next. And whilst I accept that you could look at recommendation B under the prism of, well, let's just keep looking at things, I think the very fact that we've essentially distilled it down to 2 points, which is looking at further temporary stopping places and looking at preemptive injunctions, is almost putting a flag in the sand as to this is what we want to do. And I think, with credit to Councillor Haynes earlier on, I think history has taught us on this, in that as soon as you start to align yourselves to a direction of travel, that is a bit of a Pandora's box that is hard to put the lid back onto. So I'm inclined to agree with the fact that obviously we need a long-term solution. Obviously we probably need to wait to see what government is going to do on this issue and whether their clarity or new legislation is going to assist us. But actually committing to the working group, basically it doesn't say look at whether we want to do them, it's exploring feasibility around two issues that are potentially need a bit more work on in terms of whether that's a direction of travel, could be a little dangerous at the moment. So I've got a few colleagues wishing to speak on this. So I will go, sorry, I just lost my position. I will go to Councillor Farquhar.
Sorry, Councillor Broadhead, I had put in a request.
I'll bring you in after the discussion, Councillor Rice. So I'll go to the board members first. Thank you.
It was really to get clarification from Drew about his proposal because it wasn't very clear. Would that be possible?
Sure. Councillor Mellor, I think Councillor Mellor's proposal was that Scrutiny doesn't recommend that recommendation B move forward. I think it was as simple as that, but clarity would be welcome, Councillor Mellor.
The recommendation is as simple as that, Chair, because I believe we need to do more work on it before we start narrowing down the options.
You said, yeah, so it was just about sort of what options do you perceive have been missed out of there, I suppose. Would be useful to clarify.
You're talking about, effectively, narrow it down to a multiple site option, exploring multiple sites, but you haven't actually asked if the community, if they want to, if that is a viable option. Councillor Broadhead also said there's a piece around what's happening nationally in terms of whether having conversations with Police and Crime Commissioner and etc. around, well, actually what's the opportunities to enforce current law or to utilise existing sites in our county, So this is premature. The crux of it, Councillor Rice, and where I got frustrated is you just haven't asked. Again. Anyway, I hope that's some clarification.
That's really helpful clarification
because a discussion about this, but the recommendation is clear. Thank you.
It's very helpful clarification because that's exactly what the next piece of work is asking to do. So I'm glad we're on agreement with that.
I think the spirit of the recommendation, however, is that the next piece of work is limiting it to two areas in highlighting those two areas which perhaps need further work. I've got other board members wishing to speak. Councillor Farquhar.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I do appreciate it. I mean, I did, along with many other councillors, attend the all members briefing, whereby there was officers with 25 years experience, and between them probably getting on for half a century experience of dealing with unauthorised encampments, and they were very clear as regards what powers that are available to us just now. Just to your point, whereby you were saying, if you please, Chair, that we're limiting the options. Maybe I misunderstood when Councillor Haynes said that we should, if you talk about limiting options. But anyway, from the briefing, and I can understand Councillor Mellor's frustration. Maybe you didn't attend the briefing, but from the briefing, it was very clear that the second phase, which we're actually asking to actually stop dead in its tracks, is to actually consult with the travelling community, to consult with the different stakeholders, rather than say that we're only looking at target hardening and alternative stopping places. It was actually to consult with the community that's actually affected and the residents which are actually affected. So I think the recommendation as it stands just now is to stop that work in its tracks. And I really don't see the benefit of that. So if that's the proposal, and it is to stop it in its tracks, for the working group to continue this good work and to consult with the travelling community, then I can't support it.
Thank you, Councillor Farquhar. My reading of the recommendation actually was that before we whittle it down and urge the working group to look at those areas in too much focus, that is exactly the work and the consultation that needs to happen first. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from the last few speakers, really. There are some good points in the paper, I believe, going through it. I feel it still is a bit shallow on parts of it, and I do feel it's kind of just been done the wrong way around. I feel like the consultation stage through the options that we've had, needed to be kind of before, not after. So I would be comfortable in supporting this recommendation, because I think we need to get this right. We've seen through history, like both Councillor Farquhar's raised and Councillor Bobby Dove's raised, of how many years and how much time has been put into this from across the spectrum, from existing councils, legacy councils. So I think we need to get this right, and I feel like we need to bring more people in on that consultation stage. That's why I will support the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fear. Councillor Chris Rigby. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Chair. Just reading this and listening to the recommendation, I mean, perhaps I'm misunderstanding this slightly, but at this stage, are we not just asking the working group to look at what is actually possible, sort of legally and within reason as well, before making any decisions? We're asking them here, as I understand it, to have a look at a couple of different options. It's in no way limiting to that, but it's actually starting the work now and starting to get something done. This kind of thing, looking at ways which we can deal with the travelling community when they come here and have them places to stay and make sure that the public are impacted as little as possible, has been getting put back for years now. So surely getting on and doing some work and maybe adding to this a little bit further down the line is the better thing to do. So I'm not going to be able to support the amendment as it stands at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Councillor Millie Earl.
Thank you, Chair. Same really. I mean, it's very confusing. The recommendation is perfectly formed. It looks at exploring certain options. It then looks at how we can allocate resources for consultation and the governance around it, looking at what is actually possible. And I'm really confused. I mean, does this mean the working group no longer has a function, or I just don't really understand what Councillor Mellor is trying to achieve with this recommendation. And I agree with Councillor Rigby, as before. You know, we're now at the end of the summer. We've had another difficult summer in terms of dealing with this. I think we need to start the work straight away so we can actually look at getting the consultation done over the winter period, so we can go into next summer with a very clear joined up policy in place, and you know, move ahead with this. Like Councillor Haynes said, it's been going on for a really long time, and she's had a huge amount of experience with it. But you know, it's not been solved. So if we can get a little bit closer to solving the issue, which is what this paper is asking for, then we should do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Earl. Councillor Tony Trent.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think I've got to really lay this out. The Working Party has spent a lot of time looking at options. This isn't a final recommendation of what's going to happen. This is a recommendation of where the work goes from now. And quite frankly, if you want to be in the position this year has been the position every year for years, when there's a few major traveller encampments and people out there are saying, why don't you ever do anything about it? And you've actually kicked progress into the long grass. Then quite frankly, those who would support this kicking it into the long grass, which is how I view it, would deserve to be named and shamed, because quite frankly, this is really, it's narrowing it down to things which, from a lot of work and study, has actually been identified as the way to move forward. It isn't a final solution. The final solution is what happens after that's been looked into at greater detail. More court results and things like that are taken into account, and the consultation's done, because I think part of the consideration is that if you start identifying alternative stopping places, which is different to temporary stopping place, and I think I might have made the mistake in getting the two terms mixed up 10 years ago when I was quite heavily involved in pushing this forward. That would have to be consulted with residents, and the travelling community would also have to be consulted with. Well, I'm not quite sure how you could consult with the ones that come over from Ireland or from the north of England and things like that, who are travelling around the country. So I really think that this proposal that was made just kicks it into the long grass, and we really need to get on and progress this further and go along with the recommendations, because those weren't entered into lightly. And I think it's also worth reminding those who might be trying to make something out of it, which it's not. There were more conservative members of this working group than there were of any other group. So, you know, they're also kicking their own members in the teeth with this. They're not having a go at some sort of nefarious opposition or whatever. This is something, it was an all-party group. It's come up with some suggestions of the way forward. More work's got to be done, and I really think that we should go along with doing that further work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trent. Couple more speakers. Councillor Dove, Bobby Dove.
Oh, sorry, hang on. Yes, thank you. I think I just wanted to be very clear. This isn't a political thing. This isn't about the fact there's more Conservative people on the working group or anything else. This is about the fact that we need to do some work. And I appreciate Councillor Trent says there's been a lot of work and study into this, but it's not reflected in the report. And I'm very surprised by the quality of that report that's been brought to us, because it's not up to its usual standard. Now, I do understand what people are saying about this working group and the fact that this is potentially an attempt to kick it into the long grass. It is quite the opposite. We do not need recommendations for a working group to go away, find out the options, look at case studies, see how they've impacted people up and down the country, look at best practice and see how we can use those practices here within the conurbation. And that is what my original point was all about. Let's bring this back once we've got some more in-depth understanding of how all of these options will impact our communities and also visitors to the conurbation. We don't need to have that in a recommendation. That is part and parcel of a normal everyday business for the working group.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dove. Councillor Mike Brooke.
Fine, thank you, Chair. Just very, very briefly, I was certainly assured at the seminar we had the other day that this next stage is all about consultation. It's all about consultation with people who've had experience of these debates and issues in the past. It's about consultation with the traveller community before any decisions are made. All that this proposal is, all we've seen so far from the working group is some high-level work, and this is taking it on to the next stage, which involves full consultation with the relevant groups, and consequently anything which is going to slow that down or stop it, like the amendment that's on the table, I cannot support, because it's been made very, very clear that the travelling community are going to be involved at this next stage, and the working group is just asking permission from Cabinet to go ahead with that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooke. Colleagues, I'm going to move this on now. I'll just say a last bit for me, which is that I do actually agree with Councillor Brooke there, but in a slightly different way than he's probably intending, in that this has been a big piece of work, and this does feel like many of what is in this paper is the end of that phase one of working. And to me, that recommendation B is really saying, what does phase two look like? And you know, colleagues that are watching can't see some of the information that's going on in the chat, but there has been a suggestion that, you know, by putting two things into what comes next, it does look like you are defining the parameters of that phase two piece of work. And in agreement with Councillor Bobby Dove, I do think that there's a lot of work that's already gone into this that we probably need to look at before constricting ourselves, because it does look like we're constricting ourselves to that, but also before we send that clear message out by the working group looking at those two areas, that they are areas that we actually want to explore as well. So I will now go to, we've got a proposal which has been put forward and duly seconded. Could I pass to Claire to undertake the vote for this? Thank you, Claire.
Councillor Broadhead, I have just asked to speak before the vote is partaken.
I think we've had enough discussion on this particular item now, and the board members have spoken. So if I could move to...
It's just that the additional piece, maybe an amendment that supports additional work clarification would be helpful. Then we could move forward with this piece of work.
Well, if we deal, board members can put clarifications, but we haven't had any. So at this stage, we will deal with that particular item, and then we can continue the discussion afterwards. I think that's probably the best bit. I haven't had any other recommendations or amendments to that recommendation yet. So I think probably best that we move this forward, and then if there's any further information that we wish to put forward, we can deal with that separately. So I'll move to Claire. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll read out the names of each board member, and if you could respond with for, against or abstain, please. Councillor Broadhead?
For.
Councillor Anderson?
For.
Councillor Bartlett?
Against.
Councillor Brooke?
Against.
Councillor Dove?
For.
Councillor Earl?
Against.
Councillor Farquhar?
Against.
Councillor Beer?
For.
Councillor Mike Green?
For.
Councillor Nicola Green? For. Councillor Mellor?
For.
Councillor Rigby?
Against.
Chairman, that's 7 in favour and 5 against.
Thank you very much, Claire. So we will take that through with the context through to Cabinet next week. Colleagues, before we close off the discussion, it seems like there's strong opinions on all of this side, and without wanting to put words into anybody's mouth, I think the issue moving forward is not should anything happen now, but what happens next, how that piece of work is undertaken, and in particular which areas we want to focus that search on. Are there any other colleagues that wish to have any further input at this stage? Councillor Mellor.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to be really clear, very much echoing what you just said. I fully believe we need to carry on with this piece of work, but what I'm suggesting is that we actually do need to consult on it before we start narrowing down options. If it helps when you present this at Cabinet, if it helps the portfolio holder, absolutely fully behind the work. We need to come together on a solution in this, but we've narrowed down some options before asking people. And there are people there who want to speak to us about this. I think it's quite simple. And thank you for your correction, Millie, in my typo. But there are people there we can go and speak to. So let's go and do it. This work should carry on from here.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mellor. Councillor Earl.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I'm really confused about, I'm genuinely confused as to what these alternative options are. These are the 3 options that the working group in their work already have chosen to look at. But maybe I'm just really ignorant and don't know what other issues can be. But what I got from the member briefing the other day was that this is what we've narrowed it down, or this is what we want to look at, and this is what we want to explore. And that's why I'm just really confused. So I don't know if Councillor Mellor could perhaps clarify on that, but it's just my confusion. Maybe I'm just being a bit misunderstood the conversation.
Yeah, Chair, if I may briefly, there are a myriad of options, and anybody who's been doing this for a while will understand it. You could have a single site. You could discuss whether, the interpretation of the law in terms of, how quickly the police are able to move people on. Part of that's a political choice. You could, there's as Councillor Broadhead said, there's significant activity happening around this in terms of national government and wider policy, and we'll understand that through a lot of work happening in the LGA. We have narrowed down the options too early. There are more options. I appreciate some of the people around the table might not have, been in discussions around this for a longer period of time, but there are more options. And just as a point of absolute clarity, can we not just turn this, this council into somebody that actually tries and asks people what they want before, imposing stuff on them? We've narrowed the options down without speaking to people. It's frankly nonsense.
Thank you, Councillor Mellor. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say, I really think that there's not a huge difference here between anybody's views. Everybody wants this work to continue. It's a question of what the content of that work would be. And Councillor Felicity Rice has said quite clearly that she wants to consult through this working group with all sorts of people, and also that nothing, I think she said that everything else would be considered. Just because it's not there doesn't mean to say that you can't explore other avenues, and if that's what the working group does, then I believe that will satisfy Councillor Mellor's requirements. So I think we all want solutions here, and I don't really think that we are disagreeing here. It's just the terminology that we've used in this one recommendation. It's as simple as that. And so, let's let the working group go ahead and let it explore all avenues, and let's get some ideas on the table.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bartlett. And as always, when I put that recommendation forward, I will be taking the kind of more rounded discussion forward as well. And of course, it is quite within Cabinet's gift to change that recommendation, to accept our recommendation, to put a new recommendation. And so we'll have to see what comes out of that. I'll go to Councillor Felicity Rice and then Councillor Lawrence Fear.
Just that Lawrence Fear did put in his RTS before me, but I'm happy to go.
Carry on, you're on now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, it was just to agree with Councillor Bartlett. Like I think from the member briefings that were attended by a lot of councillors and really good discussions, there is general consensus here, and like I really appreciate the concern from councillors here about getting good engagement, because it is critical, and other councils of it, and including the preceding authorities, have learnt from that and know about engagement, and all of the people on the member working group would agree that this is sort of top priority. But it was just to highlight that it was a cross-party working group. There was a lot of hours spent on it, and these recommendations have come from them, so it's not a personal recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. And I think that's a very good point, actually, and one point that Cabinet may well wish to consider, because obviously there's, as I mentioned in my statements and thoughts earlier, that there are two parts to this paper. There's the what are we doing to harmonise now, and what are we going to focus on in the future. I think a number of us were uncomfortable with picking out those particular 2 points, which does look prescriptive about the future. And of course, as Councillor Mellor said, actually, it is now probably a political choice about what we decide to do further work on, because there may well be things that that politically we don't want to explore further, because even if it came out with feasibility studies, we wouldn't want to go down that road, particularly when there's previous experience of those rabbit holes from the past. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to kind of pick up on a multiple of councillors that have already spoken. The work that has already been done in the working group won't go to waste. I think that's important, because we've had, there's been lots of hours and lots of people's time gone into that. That definitely won't be wasted, in my opinion, on this. There is consensus, like Councillor Rice said, across the board on this. We all want to find resolution to this issue, and I think we will. And by doing that, working collaboratively, we will be able to do that. So I think, from all the work that's been done so far, it's very positive. And just I think for myself, in kind of reassuring, I can't see any of the work that's been done to this point going to waste at all in formulating our viewpoints going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fear. Colleagues, I'm very mindful of the time, and I haven't seen any other colleagues wishing to indicate on this item. I'll take that recommendation with the spirit it was intended, and with the fullness of the background to Cabinet for their consideration, because it is important that they have their stamp on this and decide what they want to focus on, as well as I'm sure they will when they consider the findings of the working group. Thank you very much, Councillor Felicity Rice, for your attendance today on a number of items. You're free to go. You can escape. And colleagues, that takes us on to item 9 of the agenda, which is a scrutiny of corporate-related Cabinet reports. We have one item here, which is a 2019-20 end-of-year performance report that will be introduced by the Cabinet member, Councillor Slade. Thank you for joining us, Councillor Slade. Sorry, are you with us? Apologies, we're just seeing if we can get hold of Councillor Slade. I think she's on the call, but she's currently muted. Just bear with us while we see if we can get hold of her. If not, I may have to, I think she may well have gone she might well have lost the connection. Do we have any officers with us that might well be able to introduce the item on Councillor Slade's behalf?
Chair, this is Julian Oscalop. I could, if you wish me to, while we wait for Vicky to rejoin.
You carry on, and if she gets us, then she can contribute at the end if she okay. manages to get back. But okay. Yes, I'm sure you know it back to front. Thank you.
Okay, firstly, councillors, apologies. I'm going to leave my camera off. I've been experiencing broadband problems for the first time since March. So perhaps somebody up there doesn't want me to talk. So this report, you will recall that last Cabinet cycle, we brought the performance framework that we're proposing to implement for BCP Council, and that was approved. This report is the retrospective end of year performance report for 2019-20. The first point to make is clearly we had hoped that we would have brought both of those reports earlier than we have. COVID interrupted the plans to do so, and we will be getting back into something approaching a more regular cycle of annual and regular performance monitoring for you. So against that backdrop, what you have is...
Hello.
Oh, Vicky, are you back?
Sorry, I'm back. I'm hoping I'm not going to even try and... Oh, my video is on. Yeah, I am back. Do you want me to start again, or do you want to carry on?
No. So all I've done is introduce the fact that we brought the framework last cycle, and this is the end of year report, and that both of them were clearly more delayed than we would have liked because of the COVID response. And so I'm happy for you to take over from there.
Thank you for that, Julian. I'm ever so sorry. I'm literally sitting on the stairs hoping I'm going to retain connection. I don't know how long it's going to last, so apologies. So basically, this report is informed by a basket of measures that we used in the midterm report, which came to overview and scrutiny in Cabinet in November of last year, and many of them are based upon assessments that councils are assessed on a national basis, and others are measures that have been carried over from one or more of the legacy councils. We did note overview and scrutiny in November last year that there was a hope that we would move to be automating most of these measures, and it was noted that whilst it was useful to have them, actually what we wanted to see was the actual change as opposed to the measurements for the measurement's sake. As Julian's just alluded to, these are the measures by which the performance management framework will assess both political progress and officer progress in terms of their workflows and their assessments throughout the year. And we will be setting a new set of 2021 measures, which are based upon the statutory measures that the council has to be judged on, but also the delivery plans and the action points from the delivery plans that were adopted back in February of this year when we adopted the delivery plans from the strategy. There is a lot of detail in this report. I did ask for Democratic Services to send a different link because the paper actually has a link that takes you to a part of this performance website that you have to log into. I believe Claire has done that now. But what's really great about that is if you do use the correct link, anyone can go in and see how we're progressing against any of the measures and also against the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which measures match up to each of the 17 goals. And I think that's something which we've gone above and beyond in making sure that we're assessed on those, as well as on the matters from our corporate strategy itself.
Looks like we may have lost Councillor Slade again.
Yeah, I don't know whether Julian can step in. I'll text you, Councillor Slade.
Yeah, I was just making sure for a minute then it wasn't me that you'd lost. Yes, I think we were coming to the close anyway. But anything else you wish to add, Mr. Oscarthorpe?
No, Chair. I apologise that Vicky and I didn't rehearse this clearly. So I don't know what she had intended to say, but I think you're right, that we are coming naturally to the point where, as members of the Scrutiny Board, you ask questions. There are a number of my colleagues on the call tonight, in the event that, because clearly I'm not an expert in every single aspect of the organisation's activities, but there may be some questions where we'll have to provide a written response if it's a level of detail that we can't respond to this evening. And I think at that point, and reserving Vicky's right to re-enter the conversation in the event that she rejoins the meeting, I'll hand over to you to ask for questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Oscathorpe. So, colleagues, we have an array of officers on tap for any questions. Albeit we try and avoid things that are crazily specific unless we think it's pointing to something worrying. But we have all seen the report and the interim performance scorecard which is attached to the report. I think we found in the past that eyes are always drawn to the red ones, which obviously quite often are looking like they're heading in the wrong direction, or there are inherent issues that are not improving. But I will open it up to board members if there are any particular areas that they want any further clarity on. We may well have Councillor Slade back, so Councillor Slade could well respond, if not the respective or relevant officers. So, colleagues, any particular questions on this issue? These reports are often a little on the dry side, but sometimes there are some nuggets in there. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, there seems to be a few things regarding finding suitable accommodation for the most needy elderly people, and I'm wondering whether we are making enough progress in finding new facilities for older people. We've got sites earmarked in local plans for care homes and so on. And I thought that the problem was that there were adequate care homes and people weren't interested in developing them. But looking at those two things in red, it looks to me as if we do need to maybe push things a little bit in the direction of care homes on sites which are sitting there identified for care home use. So I'm sort of wondering what's kind of happening there and why this is proving to be such a difficult target to meet.
Chair, it's Councillor Slade here. Can I respond to that? I can't RTS because I can't see anything.
Yes, carry on.
Thank you. Those three particular items relate to the number of residents in residential care home, and primarily are a legacy issue from Bournemouth, where there was a higher proportion of elderly and also disabled adults that went into residential care. So when you connect the three together, you've got a higher than average number of people in residential care, not home care. The proportion of those with disabilities working is also low, because typically when they're in residential care, there's less tendency for an independent life. And then if you also look at the level of those individuals who are in unsettled accommodation, those that are in residential care are considered to be in unsettled accommodation. So if you combine those three together, what we should see is if we can increase the number of adults with disabilities from Bournemouth living in an independent settings. And we do just have a brand new facility opening in the next couple of weeks for adults with learning disabilities, young adults with learning disabilities. We should then, in due course, see all three of those measures improve.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slade. Councillor Mike Brooke.
Yeah. It's just, in a way, following on from Councillor Trent. Let me just bring up the figures I want. Looking at reference number 1 in the scorecard, I'm just wondering, I've heard the reasons for the discrepancy and why it is red, but actually from the figures that are given, I'm just wondering why it is actually red in the first place. Is it because we've set ourselves a target which is too high or too low to reach? And secondly, if you actually look, the annual outturn is below the forecast outturn, and therefore, in terms of what is good performance, it is actually better performance than was forecast. So why is it actually red? Should it not perhaps be orange, bearing in mind that the target that is set on it for an annual basis is marginally over the national average, which of course we would expect it to be, bearing in mind the higher proportion of 80 and 90-year-olds we've got in the authority. So if Councillor Slade could just clarify, I'm suggesting here that it shouldn't be, this one shouldn't be red, but actually should be orange.
On the basis that it's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Probably marginal, I suppose, on the basis that the benchmark, it's outside of the benchmark and outside of the forecast. So you're right. I would say it probably should be amber. Perhaps we're being a little hard on ourselves on that one.
Fine, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooke. And then Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Chad. It was just some clarification on point 82, and I wouldn't ask for a in and out and up and down kind of read into this point, but it was just seeing where we were with the progression of point 82, which is a suicide prevention plan, and just seeing if that is still going to be on track, and if there was a very brief kind of overview of what that will entail, just because of the adjustments considering COVID-19. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to not be able to hear when this is coming to a close. I don't have the details specifically on that, because that's not, I can't see that on this agenda, but I do know that the suicide prevention plan is in the Cabinet Forward Plan. I don't have the details of that because we don't tend to get the detail until a month or so beforehand. But certainly, I think it's probably about 3-4 months away from having that suicide prevention plan. A lot of work has been going into it throughout the period of COVID with all of the partners. But it is certainly still due to be coming forward. I'd need to check the Cabinet Forward Plan, but certainly in the next few months in terms of suicide prevention.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slade. Colleagues, I don't have any further questions on this item, so thank you to Councillor Slade for joining us, and then not joining us, and then joining us, and not joining us. But this is the hazards of technology. Just getting in there before I have Councillor Iyengar, who wants to have the last word or the last question. Councillor Iyengar.
Sorry, I didn't mean for the drama. Excuse me. I also apologise. Just in the Word document report, I'm going to make a general comment. It's about the two sections, which are paragraphs 88 to 96 on modern, accessible, accountable council, and just below that, further on, paragraphs 109 to 113, future monitoring of progress against the corporate strategy. And I beg of you, this is meant more constructively than it may come out. It's kind of light. This is year one of course, BCP Council, and allowing for getting accustomed to the place and people finding their feet and so on. You've heard me mention this before, where literally, plans at least being sort of put together, baselined, shared with people, and then sort of literally the phase one or the phase zero of things happening. And then this year moving up a gear, COVID notwithstanding, of course. And just, if I may just give a view, which is both sets of paragraphs are just remarkably light on detail. There's things about FOI, there's a few things on something else, I think on the people model and so on. But, please, we can't get away with that. Even if something as dry and intangible as corporate strategy, we really ought to be have had and be having some real specifics in there for what we're doing on the people model, what we're doing on estates, what we're doing on procurement, middle office, and in transforming the council. And okay, let's push hard on this going forward. But it could have been more.
So if I could respond on that, please.
Go ahead.
So this is a reflection, as I said in my introduction, on the basket of measures that was previously used and that this council's shadow set up. This year, the 2021, which is using all of the delivery plans and all of the actions and targets that we've set out through the corporate strategy and the delivery plans are for 2021. This is a backwards look at a time when we didn't have a corporate strategy signed off until partway through the year, and we didn't have any delivery plans until February. So, as we said in November and as we said in February, this is almost irrelevant, because not only is this looking at that first year where there was no progress being made on something, when we actually didn't even have a management structure until about 6 months in, because the council was born with, prematurely, a year too early. The staff have been working their socks off over the first year to actually get the frameworks in place. And to actually have that in place in that first year is actually a result in itself. So whilst it would be great to have progress against people strategy, the performance management framework wasn't signed off until 3 weeks ago. So you can't assess people against the people strategy when you didn't have anything to assess them by. And that, I'm afraid, is the nature of how long things take in an organisation of this size, despite the incredible efforts of every single member of staff within. So, yes, I would love to have had more measures, but these are the measures that we started with, and in the 2021 year, we'll have a whole new different set of measures, but there's very little point in creating them for the last few months of the year, which aren't being assessed until halfway through the following year due to a pandemic.
Thank you very much.
I didn't get the opportunity just to say that, there are a number of measures in there where we are doing exceptionally well, and I just want to pay tribute to, particular areas like the delayed discharges from hospital, where we're well ahead of people in just the southwest, but across the country. The amount of our children in care placements that are both local and in local authority placements rather than private placements. The use of libraries and the time taken to process benefit claims, they're all well ahead of where they should be. So, yes, there are some reds, but as you said, Chair, we always tend to focus on the reds, but I want to congratulate the staff on the number of greens that we've managed to get. As I say, it is unfortunate it's been a delayed paper, but it does allow us to bring that year to a close and look now at the 2021 year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Slade, and all of the members that took part in that discussion. Colleagues, that takes us to the close of item 9 and rapidly the close of the meeting. The only final item we have is item number 10, which are the future meeting dates. Colleagues will note that they are already in the diary for the 19th of October, 16th of November, etc., etc. Unless I have any pressing reason why colleagues are unhappy with those now. The next one, probably the most important. We've got time to noodle around with the later ones, but I'm not seeing any dissent from that. So that we will note. In which case, I will. The next meeting of the Oakdale Scrutiny Board will be on the 19th of October 2020. That concludes all of the items for today. I'll take any recommendations, as I always do, through to Cabinet in a week and a half's time. Thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to officers, Cabinet members, and anybody else and members of the board, and have a lovely evening. Thank you for joining us. Good night.